Hello everyone, welcome to another video tutorial on the Code Angle YouTube channel. In today's video, we're going to make use of Angular 17 as well as the API layer marketplace and Airtable to create an email verification application that determines if valid emails should be saved into the Airtable database or not. So you might be wondering what the API layer marketplace is. It's basically a place where you get access to a wide range of APIs, which ranges from payments gateways to social media integrations. So for the purpose of today's tutorial, we're going to make use of a specific API in the API layer marketplace called email verification API. So if you search for this particular API in the API layer marketplace, you can see we can see the email verification API, and what it does basically is it helps us to validate and verify an email address, and it also accesses the deliverability and quality of a specific email. As we go deeper into the tutorial, I'm going to show you how this specific API works. On the other hand, according to the zapier.com website, Airtable is a cloud-based platform used for creating and sharing relational databases. It has a user-friendly interface which allows anyone to spin up a database in minutes, which is exactly what we're going to do. You can store, organize, and collaborate on information about anything like employee directories, products inventories, and even apartment hunting. But in our own case, we're going to make use of Airtable to store only valid and verified email addresses. So before we proceed, let's take a quick look at the demo of today's project. So back into our Angular application, within the input field, I'm going to enter a random email address with an invalid extension, and then I'm going to click on submit and wait for the response. As you can see, we get a response that notifies us that email does not meet criteria. When I check the Airtable database, we can see that under the email column, we do not have any saved email address. Now, let's try to input a valid email address. So quickly, I'm going to type in my email address, which is code@thecodeangle.com, and then I'm going to press submit and wait for the response. As you can see, we get a notification that says email has been saved to the database. To be sure this is correct, I'm going to head straight to the Airtable database, and you can see in real time, without refreshing the database, the email gets saved in the email column of the Airtable database. So this is basically what we are going to build today. So what you are going to learn in this tutorial is how to work with the API layer marketplace, which we are going to use the email verification API from the API layer marketplace, as well as how to integrate Airtable into an Angular application. So stay tuned. If you are new to the channel, make sure you like as well as subscribe. And with that, let's get started with this tutorial. To get started with this tutorial, as you can see, I have a GitHub repository that contains the user interface design of the input field in the demo I showed moments ago. So instead of creating everything from scratch, I'm going to clone this repository directly in my terminal. So to do that, I'm going to click on this drop down and then copy the HTTPS link. The link to this repo is going to be made available in the description box on YouTube, so you don't need to be worried about that. So heading straight to my terminal, I'm just going to run the command git clone and then the link to that particular GitHub repo. So we're going to wait for the projects to get cloned in our terminal. So now that the project has been cloned, the next step is to cd into the directory of the project. So I'm going to type in the cd command, and then the directory of the project is email-validator-ui, and I'm going to press enter. So now that we are in the directory of the project, we need to install all the packages in the package.json file before we can compile this project successfully. And to do that, we need to run npm install and then press enter. So this might take some few minutes depending on how strong your system or your internet service provider is. So I'm going to pause the video while this is taking place. So now that the installation is complete, we can now open up the project in Visual Studio Code by typing the traditional code and .text. So this is going to open up in Visual Studio Code. And to be sure that all installation is complete, I'm going to type in the ng-serve command in Angular to compile the project. And while the project is compiling, I'm going to take a brief overview. The first place I want to talk about is when we open up the src directory in the index.html file, you see that we have a CDN link to Bootstrap 5. So what that means basically is this project's design is made by Bootstrap 5. So in the app directory where we have our components, in the app component.html file, you can see Bootstrap 5 classes everywhere in the project. I think we don't need this part, so I'm going to get rid of that. So this is a very simple user interface that is just displaying an input field on the page. And also, if we check the styles.css file, you see we don't have any CSS styles there as well. So all the design is made through Bootstrap 5 classes. Now with that, let's check if our compilation is complete. As you can see, our compilation is complete and it can be accessed in localhost 4200. So quickly, I'm going to head to the browser and type in localhost 4200. And as you can see, we have the UI displaying on the browser. So right now, there's no implementation, nothing works. So this is how we want it to be. And with that, we can now move to the next step of these projects, which is to set up the APILayer marketplace. So if you don't have an APILayer marketplace account, it's very simple. Just head straight to apilayer.com. I already have an account. As you can see, this is my profile, and I created it by making use of my email address. So once in these websites and you've created your account, to get your API key, all you need to do is to search for the specific API you want to work with. Because this is the marketplace and you have so many APIs available. For instance, you can see we have the Hipstack API, the image upload API, the odds API, and so much more. So many APIs you can work with on the APILayer marketplace. But for us, we are working with the email verification API. So all you need to do is just to search for the email verification API, and then once you search and it provides the results, you need to subscribe to the API. And to do that, all you need to do is to click on the subscribe button. Because I already subscribed to this API, I'm only seeing the manage subscribe button. For instance, if I click on the subscription tab, you can see I already subscribed to the free plan, and I can make 100 requests per month, and it's free for life, no credit cards required. Other plans, you can see I can make thousands of requests depending on amounts I want to pay for each of these particular subscription. But for us, because this is an educational tutorial, we are going to make use of the free plan. So once you've subscribed, you then get access to the API key, which you can see right here. Currently, I've used this API so far this month 44 times, and before the end of this tutorial, I'm sure I'm going to use it less than 100 times. So I have nothing to worry about. So to get started with the integration of this API key, I need to create an environment folder in my Angular application. And to do that, I'm going to head back to the terminal and then create the environment folder by making use of the ng-generate environment command. Once that command is complete, you can see we have this environment folder created in our Visual Studio Code. So to integrate the APILayer API key, all I need to do is just to type in the key within the object. But before I do that, the first thing I'm going to type is the production, which I'm going to set to false. I think I do this for all my Angular tutorials. And then for the APILayer key, I'm going to create a key called APILayer key, which we are going to access in the service, and it's going to be within a quote. So let's just copy the API key and then paste it right here. So I'm going to save that, and the next thing we need to do is to start working with the service. And because when we work with the service, we need to work with the HTTP client. So I'm going to head straight to the app.config.ts file, and within this array, I'm going to inject the provide HTTP client package. So to do that, let's put a comma right there and then open a square bracket, and I'm going to type in provide HTTP client. So you can see provide HTTP client is imported right above. With that, we have access to the HTTP client in our service. So with that, we can now create the service folder. So I'm going to clear everything we've done so far in the terminal, and then let's run the command ng generate service, and I want this service to be within a services folder. So we're gonna be services / I'm gonna call it email validator. So let's call it email dash validator. So I'm gonna press enter and then wait for the service to get generated for us. So now that the service has been generated, I'm going to head back to Visual Studio Code. Let's close out the app config file and then the app component.html file, as well as the index.html file, and then head straight to our service, which is our email validator service. And within this service, we're not going to make use of the constructor, so I'll get rid of the constructor. Instead, we're going to make use of the inject. We're going to make use of the injector. So to do that, I'm going to create private HTTP client is equals to inject, and within the inject, we're going to have the HTTP client. So I'm just going to type in HTTP client. So we need to import both HTTP clients as well as inject. So as you can see, we both import them from the @Angular core library, and then with that we can be able to work with the get request, the post request, whatever request we want to work with. But for this tutorial, we're going to be working with the get request because the email validator API or the email verification API is a get request. So next step before I proceed, let's create the email validator function. So I'm going to create a function called email validator, and then before I proceed, I want to head back to the API layer marketplace, and let's head straight to documentation. And within the documentation, I'm going to scroll down and let's head to the get /email, and let's see the implementation. You can see the implementation in JavaScript right here. I think you have access to other programming language like Swift, PHP, Python, but for us, we are going to look at JavaScript. You can see the API requires some headers, and then we need to append the key as well as the API value. Then it's a get method, and it has a base URL. The base URL is https://api.apilayer.com, then /email verification, and then the specific email we're trying to verify. So this is how the API works. So what I want to do next is within the environment folder, I would like to set up the base URL. So let's grab this particular extension, this URL right here. So I'm going to copy that particular up to that particular point, and then let's head straight to the environment folder or the environment.development file rather, and then let's type in API layer URL and then paste in the URL. So these are base URL secured in the development folder or file rather, and then we need to set up the headers as well. So to set up the headers, I'm going to create a variable called const headers is equals to new HTTP headers. We need to import this as well. As you can see, it's being imported from @Angular /common/HTTP, and then it's going to take in a parenthesis, and we're going to say .set. And after the .set, we need to pass in two particular arguments. The first one is the key, and then the value for the key, which is the API, because when you head back, you can see this implementation right here. You can see in the headers we have the API key as well as the API key, which is the key, and then the value for the key. I hope that makes sense. So within the set method, let's just open a quote, and then we type in the API key just like we have it in the documentation. So it's just as good as grabbing that to ensure that it's following what we have in that documentation. And there's an error because it's expecting two arguments. As you can see, it's expecting two arguments. So far we've injected one. So the second argument, we're going to make use of backtick because we are trying to access the API value from the environment file. So I'm going to type in environment, and okay, I'm not doing this properly. We also have the $sign in front, and then have the square brackets. So with that, we should be able to import environment without an S, and we're importing the development environment. So once we import that, if you look above, we have access to environment, and then I'm going to say dots. We have access to the API layer key, the URL, and then as well as production. But what we need is the key, so it's going to be environment dot API layer key. So with that, we've configured the headers. Then we can now move on by returning the HTTP client request. So to do that, I'm going to type in the return keyword. So I'm going to say return this dot HTTP client, which is the not email validator, HTTP client, which is the instance of the variable we created right here. So HTTP client dot, we have access to different requests, delete, add, JSONP options and the likes, but we're working with get, just like the documentation requires. So once you type in get, I'm going to open a bracket, and within the bracket, we're going to need, that's where we are going to implement the URL. So to do that, once again, we're going to make use of backticks. This time around, I don't forget the $sign. So all we need to do is just say environment dot, this time we need the API URL. Now we need the endpoint. So I'm going to head back and I'm going to grab the endpoints. While working with this API, I was working with the first one, which is /email verification /check, and then the parameters within the URL, which is email equals to email. So I'm going to grab all that and then I'm going to copy it and then paste it within the environment URL. So we have an error, so we need to configure the URL properly. So as you can see, we now have /email verification, then /check, and then the parameter, which is the email, and this email needs to be a variable, this email. So I'm going to add it as an argument in our email validator function. So I'm going to say email address, which is going to be a type of string. So I'm just going to grab email address, which is the type of string, and this time around is going to have its own $sign as well. So right after the brackets, I'm going to type in the $sign and then paste in the email address variable. So you can see the email address is being accessed right here within the URL. Then finally, we need to append the headers. So to append the headers, after the backtick, we can now have another object and then type in headers. So you can see headers is now being accessed right here. So with that, we've been able to create the service that handles the validation of the email address. So the next step is to head straight to our components file where we want to integrate this particular function. So in the app component.cs file, because I'm not creating a new component, we don't need to make use of any form of routing. So everything is going to be within the app component.cs file as well as the app component.html file. So I'm going to create a function similar to what we have in the service. I'm going to call this one verify email, and then we're going to have a bracket. So within the verify email, what I want to do now is in the app component.html file, I want to log the value in the input field into the console. So I'm going to open up the console. The console also doesn't want to get open, so it's opened now. So within the console, anything I type within the input field, once I click on submit, I want it logged in the console. Back in Visual Studio Code, what I'm going to do is to make use of the forms module to log the data in the input field into the console. So to make use of the forms module, we need to import it. So within the import array, let's import forms module. So as you can see, forms module is imported from Angular forms. And then next up, I can now head straight to the app components.html file. So within the app component.html file, in the input tag, we're going to make use of a banana in a box. A banana in a box is when you make use of a square bracket and then the parenthesis within a square bracket. So I can now call ngModel and then say ngModel is equals to a variable we need to set in our TS file. For now, I'm just going to call it email value. So this variable, I'm going to bind it into a signal. So in our TS file, I can say email value is equals to signal. As you can see, we are making use of signals in this tutorial, and it's going to be a string by default. So you see we have signal imported. So signal is one of the new updates created in Angular, if you are not familiar with that. And after making use of ngModel, another thing I want to do is, if we don't undo the ngModel options because we are not making use of the form attribute to set this up, so we need to set this as standalone. So to do that, we need to make use of the ngModel options, or else we're gonna get warnings in the terminal. So all I need to do is just say ngModel options. I need to set it to standalone is equals to true. So what this is saying is that this input is just in isolation, it's not attached to any form. All we are trying to do is just to get the value from the input field when we click on submit. So another thing I want to do is to get rid of the ID. We don't need the ID, which is set to email address. And then within the submit button, I want to create a click event handler. So the click event handler is where we now call the validate email function. So this or the verify email function, which we have right here. So verify email. So finally, within the verify email, we can log the value into the console. And to log the value into the console, I'm going to type in console.log, and then I'm going to say this dot email value, and then save everything we've done so far. Okay, mistakenly made an error there. So save everything we've done so far, and then head back to the browser. So let's type in something in the input field. So I'll just type in a random character, and the form is disabled by default. I forgot to handle that. So we are calling the disabled class, which we don't need. So I'm going to disable that and save once more. And let's try once again. So I click on submit. You can see we now have the values in the console. So we can send this value to our database, which is the Airtable database. But before we proceed, I would like to do some form of validation to the submit button. So instead of the form being active all the time, what we can do is to say, let's make use of the disabled attribute. So I'm going to call disabled, and then I'm going to say if the email value dot length is probably less than 5, then the form should be disabled. Let's see if this works. So you can see the form is disabled by default. So if I type in 1 2 3 4 5, then the form gets enabled. So that means you can't submit an empty field into the database. So that works. So the next thing we need to do is to integrate our API. So to do that, back to Visual Studio Code, and within the verify email function in our components, all we can do is to say, the first thing we need to do is to inject the email validator service. So to do that, I'm going to make use of the injector instead of the constructor. So I'm going to say private email validator is equals to inject, and then we're going to call the email validator service. So let's import the injector as well. So with that, we get rid of the error. So now we can now access it within our function by quickly saying this dot email validator dot, we have a service called email validator service. Calling it the same name might be a bit confusing, so I'm just gonna limit this to email. Let's call this email. Let's call this email service. In fact, email service. So this dot email service dot email validator, and then open a bracket, and the bracket is expecting an argument. As you can see, expected one argument. So I'm just gonna grab the email value we have right here. No, so I'm gonna copy that, paste it within the brackets, and then subscribe by calling this dot subscribe, or dot subscribe rather, and then we're gonna have two observers. The first one is next. So within the next observer, we can have an argument of res within an arrow function, and then probably console.log for now, res, that is the response. And then we now configure the error observer as well by calling error, and then within the error observer we can alert an error. So I'm going to save that, and with that we've been able to configure the email validator service. So to be sure this works, let's head back to the browser and then try to test this out. And it seems we have an error as seen in the console, null injector error. I think this error has to do with the HTTP clients from experience. So what I'm going to do is to head straight to our app config. I believe we've already configured the HTTP client, but yes, I can see we didn't add the parenthesis at the end of the provide HTTP client. So without this, we are going to have that error. So with that added and with the page refreshed, you can see the error is gone. Now we can now test out an email address. So first off, I would like us to test out a valid email address and see what we have in the console by typing in code at the code codeangle.com, which is one of my email addresses. So we're gonna wait for the response, and as you can see, we get an object which shows some values. And one of the important values I can see for this is, you can see the format underscore valid is set to true. Free is false because this extension means it's a premium kind of email address, and then it found the MX record for this email address because it says it's true. And then the score is kind of 0.8, which is kind of high. And then the SMTP underscore check is also set to true. So let's compare this to, probably if we have a wrong extension, and then type in .com and then submit. Let's wait for the response. And as you can see, the MX record is not found, it's set to false. The score is kind of low, 0.64. and then you can see the SMTP check is also set to false. So this is pointing to the fact that if this email address ever sends an email, it's likely going to end up in spam because the MX record is false, the SMTP check is false, the score is low compared to the valid email address I tested right above. So we're going to use this criteria to determine what email to send to the database, that is our Airtable database. So quickly, I'm going to head back to Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to create a couple of conditions within our next response. That is, if the results of the response is successful, we can create a condition that says if res dot, I think let's just make use of the score. Let's say if the score is greater than 0.64. So I can just say if res.score is greater than 0.64, then we want to save data into the database. Then let's duplicate this. If res.score is less than or is equals to 0.64, then we don't want to save the data into the database. We'll just return a notification to the user that says the result cannot be saved into the database. And if you can notice, we have a warning for the score. It says property score does not exist on type objects. Ideally, we might want to create an interface for this, but because we're only dealing with a single value out of the object, I think we can work around this by not creating an interface. So we can just create another variable by saying let results is equals to res as we're gonna open a bracket, and I'm gonna say score as a type of number. We're gonna set score as a type of number, and then instead of res, what we're going to do is we're gonna replace res with results. So what we have is results.score. So with that, we are able to get rid of that warning from TypeScript. Now with that, I think we're done with the implementation of the API layer marketplace API. So now we can now walk around how we can save this particular valid email into the Airtable database this way. So I would like to create that from scratch because currently I already have an account. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to log out from this particular account, and let's create the Airtable account. And before I proceed, I would like to install the Airtable npm package because we need to install it. Yes, we need to install the Airtable npm package. You can see it has a weekly download of over 150,000, so it's used regularly. So I'm going to stop the server for now and then paste in the command for the installation into the terminal. So while that is getting installed, let's try to create a new account for free. I like creating these things from scratch sometimes so that you can get a grasp of how this works. Let's just use the sugar concepts at gmail.com. Click on continue. All right, my first name, I'm going to enter my first name or my full name, Deji Adesugar, and then enter a password. Click on continue. Select IT support or engineering, probably. I think we're trying to do engineering work, and then we're not adding extra emails, so I'm gonna skip this. We're using this for I think I'm gonna click on continue because we're not trying to implement any of that. So the app name I'm gonna call ng email, then select a color. product development. Then I think we might want to select in fact, let's create this, let's manage a custom project. So I'm going to select that and then click on next. So I can just type in projects. Yeah, I think it's required. So I'm going to click on next and let's click on finish. So with that done, a new project is going to get created for us, and we can now get started with this integration. So as you can see, what we need to do next is to go back to home. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this particular template that has been created for us. I don't need any of this. I want us to create something absolutely new. So I'm going to delete these tables as well, or these fields as well rather. So I'm going to delete, we have assigned to, I'm going to delete the field. We don't need that. So I just need an email field actually. That's why I'm deleting all this. From the demo, if you still remember, we only have the email field. So I'm going to delete all these fields. They are not needed. So I'm going to delete that as well. And then the task name, or the field name, I'm going to edit it. Instead of task name, it's going to be called email. So I'm going to save that. So we now have the email field, and it's going to be a type of short field. As you can see, as you can see here, it's a single line text. So if I click on edit, you can see single line text. We have long text, we have phone number, email, different options. So I think single line text, or probably we can select email as well. So as you can see, that works as well. So I'm going to save that and click on confirm. So we have the email field saved. Another thing I want to do is this project, I want to rename these projects. I want to edit I want to rename the table rather. So instead of projects, I want to have email underscore verification. So email verification. So I'm going to click on save. So we have under the email verification table, we have the column that says email. So this is where we want to save our emails. So to now begin with the integration, we also need the API key for this. So I'm going to click on my account and I'm going to click on developer hub, which is going to take us to a new page. And under developer hub, we need to create a token. So because currently we don't have an access token. So to create an access token, I'm going to click on this key, and the token needs a name. So I'm going to call it ng email, and then I'm going to add scope. So what I want is ability to be able to create data, but we also have the option to create, edit, and delete. So I'm going to see that. I'm going to click on that rather, and I'm going to add probably ability to see the data in the record. I think that's the scope we need for that. And then I want the token to work for all current and future projects and workspaces. So I'm going to select the particular, no, I'm going to cancel that. I don't need to select that. For us to be able to activate this or to verify the access token, we need to verify our email. So I need to head straight to my email address and try to verify the email address for this to work. So quickly, let's head to the Soga Concepts email account and then click on Airtable, then click on confirm my account. So with this confirmation, would be able to click on create token. But the downside about that is we need to refresh this page again now that we've already verified that particular email. So we need to start again. This time around, we call it the same thing, ng email, and then we add the scope, create, edit, and delete records, ability to see record. I'm going to add the base for all current and future base. You can see the token is now activated. The button is now activated. Now we need to grab the token. So I'm going to click on the copy button, and then I'm going to click on done. So you can see we now have the token created. So back in our Angular project, let's head straight to environment.development file. And in the environment.development file, we need to create a new key. So the first key is going to be called Airtable access token just like we did with the API layer. So it's going to be within a quote, and then we're going to need the URL as well. But for now, I'm just going to save, and let's try and grab the URL. To grab the URL, I'm going to click on the profile. Okay, we're already in the profile, so I'm going to click on developer docs. So developer docs is going to open a new tab in Chrome, and we are going to be presented with so many options like the scripting, custom extension, community forum, web API. What we want to work with is the web API. So I'm going to click on API docs. So under the API docs, you can see we have documentation for listing records, getting record. But what we need for is to create a record. So I'm going to click on the create record tab, so that under this part, we are going to grab the URL we need to create what we want to do. So we have integration for call and integration for let me see. Okay, yeah, we have the call integration showing how this API is integrated. So you see it's a post request, and the base URL is https://api.airtable.com, then /version 0 and the likes. But let's just copy the base URL and then set it up in our environment file. So beneath the Airtable access token, let's create the Airtable base URL. So let's save that as well. So that's the last integration in our development file. So we need to create this within the service. We need to integrate the Airtable service. So we can do this within the email validator, but I think we should just create a new file. So what I'm going to do is, instead of email validator, I'm just going to say Airtable service. So let's create the Airtable service all within the services folder. So I'm going to close this tab, and you can see the Airtable service has been created for us. We don't need the constructor. So what I'm going to do is to grab the implementation we have right here. The first one is the HTTP clients from our email validator service. We need that here as well. So I'm going to paste it. We need to inject it. We need to import the injector as well as the HTTP client as well. So with those two imported, we need to grab the implementation for the headers too, but it's kind of the headers here is kind of different compared to the API layer, because when you check the implementation, this one has a content type of application.json, and it has an authorization with bearer token. So to do that, let's create a new function. I'm going to call it save email, and within the save email function, let's create the headers. So I'm going to say const headers is equals to new HTTP headers, which we need to import, and we're going to make use of the set method. So we're going to make use of two set methods. So the first one is going to be .set, and this set is going to have content type. The content type is going to be application.json. So it doesn't stop there. We need to make use of the set method again. So this time within the parenthesis is going to be authorization. So we're going to have authorization, and the authorization is going to make use of backtick because we are trying to set the bearer token. So I'm going to say bearer and then make use of the $, and we need to import the environment file. So I'm going to say environment.airtable access token. So with that, our headers has been configured. I mean, you might want to find a better way to save the Airtable access token because it's kind of sensitive, and probably you might want to use a function for that. Probably a service like Netlify functions can help you preserve the API key in a better way. But anyways, that's beyond the scope of this tutorial. So the next thing is to configure the HTTP client. So to do that, I'm going to type return this .http client.post. It's a post request, and then let's grab the environment file by saying environment.airtable base URL, and this time around is going to be /. Now one thing you need to take note of is we need to head back to the Airtable documentation, or rather the Airtable database. So I'm going to go back to the database, and in the database we need to grab two things. The first one is the ID immediately after this URL, which is here. We have airtable.com / this particular URL you have immediately after the airtable.com. You need to grab that. So that's going to be be after the /. Although when you go back to the documentation, I think there's a way you can get this if you log into your projects. I'm not very sure. Okay, I can't seem to find it. But I think I was able to get it from here while creating this project earlier. But anyways, one way to get it is after the extension right here. You can just grab the ID, and then it's going to be / the table name, table ID or name. So you can see our table name is email_verification. So it's going to be / email_verification. I hope that's clear. Now we have this error that says expected 2 or 3 arguments. So we'll deal with that now. So another thing is it expects a payload. So for now, I'm going to make it an empty string, and then we're going to pass in the headers as expected. So all we need to do is just to say headers. So with that, we have the headers passed down here in the post request. Now this payload is going to be configured in the service level. That is, anytime we type in an API and submit, anytime we type in an email address and submit it in the input field, I want to access that particular email in our Airtable service, which you have right here. So to do that, we need to create a function that's called email value. So, or probably retrieve email value. So the retrieve email value, we're gonna create a variable called email address value, and it's going to be a signal. So I'm gonna call the signal, and it's going to be an empty string by default. We have signals imported already. So within this function, I'm just going to say this dot email address value dot set, and then I'm going to create an argument above. I'm going to call this argument mail. It's going to be a type of string, and then I'm going to set it to the mail argument. This mail argument is going to be retrieved from the component. So let's head straight to our app component.cs file, and within the verify email function, we can call this particular service or function we create, which is called retrieve the email value. So what we need to do is just to say within the verify email, we need to inject the Airtable service, in fact, to be able to access it. So I'm going to change this email service by duplicating it and calling it Airtable service, and then we import the Airtable service as well. So we have Airtable service. I think it's imported already. Yeah, the Airtable service is imported already. So let me just copy it and then paste it right there. So now all we need to do is just to say this dot Airtable service dot retrieve the email value, and then it requires an argument, just like that one is saying. And all we need to do is just to pass the value of the email within the input field. That's all we need to do. Then we save everything we've done so far. With that, we can access the particular email typed into the input field with this particular function. So that's what that does specifically. So now that we've been able to access the email entered into the input field, to ensure this works, I'm going to probably within the save email method, I'm going to say console.log. Let's console log the email address value by saying this dot email address value, and then let's save and head back to our app component.cs file. Let's inject it probably. In fact, let's create a function that calls it in our TS file, because I want to log it to the console to be sure we can access that. So what I'm going to do is to say save email to database. So within the save email to database method or function, as you may call it, let's call this dot Airtable service dot save email. I think the method is save email, if I'm not wrong. Yes, save email. So save email, and then let's subscribe to it by calling subscribe, and we return two observers as well, next, as well as error, the two expected observers. So this one alerts an error, while this one console logs a response. So we can just say console.log response. Okay, with that, what I'll do is just to copy save email to database. I know this is not going to work because we are not passing the right payload right here. So I just want us to ensure that we're able to display this email address value in the console within this email. If that shows successfully, then we can pass it as payload. But for now, let's test it out. So within the next observer, and where we have the results.core as greater than 0.64, I can just say this dot what's this method called, save email to database. This dot save email to database, I'm going to paste it right there, and then I'm going to save everything we've done so far. Okay, keep making this error. So I think we've saved everything. We need to run the server once again by calling ngserve. So what this basically does is everything within the save email service is going to get called, including this console log, which is what we're interested in for now. So let's check our console once again. It's compiled successfully, and let's wait for it to refresh. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to enter the valid email address I've entered previously that meets the right criteria, which is code@codeangle.com. I'm going to click on submit. Let's see if we get anything in our service. As you can see in our Airtable service, in line we get an error. Of course, I was expecting the error from Airtable, which is what we have right here. So you can see we have the code@codeangle.com email address, which is what we are entering into this input field, which is exactly what we want. And in the network, you can see it says invalid request meeting fields. Yes, we're gonna deal with that now. So with this, we've now been able to confirm that this particular variable works the way we want it to. So now let's pass it as a payload. So to pass it as a payload, all I need to do is just to say const payload is equals to, I'm going to open a object. Now if you check the call documentation, you can see it's expecting a field value as the payload, and then we enter whatever value we want into it. So it's expecting it to come this specific way. So all we need to do is just to say fields, and then we create an object because it's expecting an object, just like we have here. The field is expecting an object. Then we need to pass in the object is expecting, which is the email. The email is not something random I'm typing. The email is the name of the column we're trying to inject the email into, which is what we have here, email. That's what it's called. And then I'm going to pass in this dots. Let me just grab it instead of typing it out. This dots email address value. So let's just paste it there. So now we can now pass the payload within our post request. So I'm going to save, and then I think with this, once we try to send the email, it should be able to get saved to the database. Let's test this out if it works. So I'm going to type in code@codeangle.com. So I'm going to click on submit. As you can see, the email verification works. We get a successful response. And when we check the Airtable database, boom, we have our email sent to the database successfully. So with that, we can conclude that our implementation works. So the final thing I want to do is anytime we click send an email, I want the input fields to clear off once the request is sent, and I want a notification, a success notification if it's successful, and a failure notification if it fails. So this is where ngx-toastr comes into play. So I'm going to head to the npm package called ngx-toastr. I'm going to copy the installation command, stop the server, and then paste it in. So while ngx-toastr is being installed, I'm going to close the tab, and within this if condition, I'm going to say this dot our email value. I'm going to say this dot email value, which is a signal. So this dot email value dot set, I'm going to set it to an empty string anytime a request is sent. So this will clear off the input field immediately after the request. Each of these conditions are met, so it gets cleared off. So I think you get what I mean by that. So we can also see that ngx-toastr has been installed, and to configure it, the first thing we need to do is after installation is to install Angular animations. But by default, Angular animations is installed because when you check the package.json, we have Angular animations already installed in our package.json file. And then what we need to do next is for standalone components in our app config, we need to grab provide animation and provide toastr. So within the app config file, so I'm gonna paste this right in, and we need to inject them as well. That's why these warnings are showing. So we have provide animations. I need to import it. Let's grab it and then paste it right there. Okay, I think there's an error. Okay, I think it has to do with the comments. Let's just get rid of the comments. The comments are not necessary. So I'm going to save that. So you can see we have provide animations and provide toastr. And finally, we need to grab, or not finally, we need to set up the CSS. So to set up the CSS, I'm going to open this toast CSS in another tab, and I'm going to grab all the CSS files we see right here. So to do that, I'm going to copy everything and then paste it in the root of our CSS file, which is this style.css file. So with this, we have access to all the CSS classes for our ngx-toastr. So I'm going to close that, and then the messages for ngx-toastr for success message is going to be this.toastr.success, which we have right here. And if it's a failure message, it's going to be this.toastr-service.error. So we need to set this up in our app component.ts file. We need to inject ngx-toastr. That's kind of twisting my tongue. So I'm just going to say private toastr is equals to inject toastr service. So you can see we have toastr service imported above. So with toastr service imported above, so immediately after the successful, like the results, if the result is greater than 0.64, which is what we want to save in the database, so that has to be a success. So we can just say this.toastr, then the response or the value of the response is email has been saved successfully to the database. Then for a failed response, or not a failed response, for a response that does not meet the validation requirements, email does not meet the expected criteria. Email does not meet the expected criteria. So I think I can save that. So instead of success, that will be error. So this is going to be toastr.error. So let's save and run ngserve, I think, for the final time in this project, and see what happens when we test it out finally. So I'm going to clear the console, close the console, and then let's delete or better still, let's use another email address. First, let's use a wrong email address that probably would not meet the criteria. So I'm going to type in something random at somethingrandom.com and then click on submit. Let's see if the toast notification gets sent. We get no response. Let's inspect the console to see if there's any issue. Okay, I think we didn't enter a valid format. I entered the wrong character. Let's try this again. You can see email does not meet the right criteria. You can see the form gets cleared and the form gets the button gets disabled immediately. But I notice ngx-toastr is not showing the right CSS value for some reason. Probably our implementation is not very correct. So I'm just gonna check the documentation once more. I think our implementation is correct, but probably let's try again while refreshing the page, because what I'm seeing here is exactly what we need to do. So I'm just going to refresh the page once more, and probably the CSS didn't catch the first time. So I'm just going to say type in something wrong or random, and then you can see, yes, the toast notification now shows, it says email does not meet the expected criteria. So let's enter another email address, the code angle, which is another valid email I have, the code angle at the codeangle.com. Let's click on submit. You can see we have a successful response. Email has been successfully saved to the database, or email has been saved successfully to the database, any one of those two. So you can see in the database we now have the codeangle at the codeangle.com. So with that, we've been able to successfully create an email verification application by making use of APILayer, Airtable, and Angular to create an email verification application. So if you have any questions, you can feel free to drop it in the comment section. If not, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again in the next one.